Any last words?
You probably weren't expecting to see this on the Jewellery channel, but someone asked us to make a solid silver guillotine. Now, in all the years I've been a jeweller, we've made a lot of unusual things. Rings, pendants, miniature tools, even tiny working lots. But guillotine, that's definitely a first. So if you enjoy unusual builds like this, stick around because we're about to show you exactly how we made it. Now, if you've ever heard of a guillotine, you'll probably picture a big wooden frame, a heavy blade, and well, someone losing their head. And that's pretty much exactly what it was. The guillotine was a real machine used for executions, most famously during the French Revolution, and it quickly became one of the most famous and feared devices in history. But here's the thing most people don't realise. Long before the guillotine existed, people were already being executed by beheading. Kings, queens, prisoners, enemies of the state. If someone wanted you gone, the usual method was simple: a block, an axe, and one very nervous executioner. And as you can imagine, that didn't always go smoothly. Sometimes it worked perfectly, other times it was far more brutal than anyone expected. But the strange thing is, the guillotine wasn't invented to be more terrifying, it was actually invented to be more humane. Now, before the guillotine was invented, executions were already happening all over Europe. But instead of a machine doing a job, it was usually done by a person, an executioner with a big axe or sword. And the idea was simple: one clean strike. But in reality, it didn't always go that way. Sometimes the executioner got it right first time, but sometimes it took 2 blows or 3. And sometimes even more. One famous example was Mary, Queen of Scots. When she was executed in 1587, the executioner actually needed 3 strikes to finish the job. And there's even a worse story. A woman called Margaret Pole, she was nearly 70 years old, reportedly needed about 10 blows before the execution was finally over. So as you can imagine, these events were not quick. And they were definitely not tidy. And that's exactly why many years later, someone had a very unusual idea. What if there was a machine that could do the job instantly, every single time? Which is where the story of the guillotine really begins. Now this is where the story takes a strange turn. The guillotine wasn't invented by a mad scientist or a cruel king. It was actually suggested by a doctor. His name was Dr. Joseph Guillotine. And in 1789, during the early days of the French Revolution, he stood up in front of a French government with a very unusual idea. At the time, executions depended on who you were. If you were rich or powerful, you might be executed quickly with a sword. But if you were poor, things could be much worse. Different punishments, different methods, sometimes much more painful. Dr. Guillotine thought that was completely unfair, so he proposed something radical. He said if the country was going to execute people, it should be done the same way for everyone. Fast, simple, and equal. His idea was a machine with a heavy blade that would fall instantly and end a life in a split second. No mistakes, no second blows, just one clean drop. The plan was to make executions more humane, but what happened next turned the guillotine into one of the most famous and feared machines in history. When the guillotine was first introduced, the idea was simple: a quick, fair, and equal way to carry out execution. But once it was built, things escalated very quickly. This was the time of the French Revolution. The country was in chaos. The king had lost control, and the people were angry, very angry. Suddenly, anyone accused of being an enemy of revolution could be arrested, and if courts decided you were guilty, you were sent straight to the guillotine. In the middle of a public square, crowds would gather to watch. Thousands of people packed into the street. It became almost like a strange public event. The blade would drop, and the crowd would gasp, and then the next prisoner would step forward. During the period known as the Reign of Terror, thousands of people were executed by the guillotine. Kings, queens, nobles, soldiers, even the very revolutionary who had helped start it. The machine that was invented to make death more humane had suddenly become the most feared symbol in all of France. And the craziest part is, the guillotine didn't disappear when the revolution ended. In fact, it stayed in use for far longer than most people realised. Now here's the part of the story that really surprises people. Most of us think of the guillotine as something from hundreds of years ago, something from the old history books, but it actually stayed in use much longer than you can think of. In fact, the last execution by guillotine was in France. That happened in 1977. That's the same decade people were watching Star Wars in a cinema, which means while the world was moving into the modern age, this old machine from the French Revolution was still being used. A strange mix of engineering, politics, and human history. And now, somehow, that story has made its way into our jewellery workshop. Now, if you've ever had an idea for something unique, no matter how strange, creative, or completely different, we love challenges like that. If you like something made in gold or silver, just get in touch. You can email me directly at jamesmarsh@blackwelljewellers.co.uk and we'll bring your idea alive. Thank you for watching. I'm James the Blackwell Jewellers, and please subscribe to the channel.
Any last words?
Oh.